You know, back in 1978, a single Dungeons & Dragons adventure didn't just tell a new story. It completely ripped a hole in the fabric of the game itself. It took D&D from this predictable, vertical crawl down into a dungeon and spun it out sideways into a sprawling, terrifying underground wilderness.
And it all kicked off with a huge problem that designer Gary Gygax was facing. See, his home players, they were basically gods at this point. They had smashed their way through armies of giants. They'd stood in the fiery halls of a giant king and won. They were loaded, they were powerful, and they'd seemingly conquered everything. So, what do you do next? Where do you even go from there?
Well, the solution was nothing short of revolutionary. Instead of just giving them another dungeon level to clear, Gygax dreamed up a pursuit, a frantic chase into a labyrinth that spanned an entire continent, miles under the earth, with no easy way back to the surface. And that was the whole idea behind Descent into the Depths of the Earth, an adventure that would change how we play D&D forever.
Now, to really get how much of a game changer this was, we got to take a step back and look at what D&D was actually like before 1978. The way people played was pretty straightforward, and it really shaped the entire hobby.
Okay, so this right here illustrates the massive shift in thinking. On the left, you've got your classic mega dungeon. Just think of it like an underground skyscraper. You go down, level by predictable level, and hey, if things get too hairy, you can always just climb back up and run back to town to heal up and buy more potions. But Descent, it introduced the subterranean wilderness on the right. This wasn't a building, it was a world, a horizontal, endless sprawl of tunnels where up and down don't mean anything, and there is no town to run back to. You're on your own.
So this adventure, Module D1, was the bridge. It was the thing that connected the epic giant slaying campaign to a totally new story about the mysterious Drow. Its whole purpose was to drag players out of their comfort zone, out of the familiar world of castles and forests, and dump them into this truly alien place where the journey itself was trying to kill you.
And what's really wild is when all of this was happening. Gygax was designing this incredibly deep, complex adventure. At the same time, the core rules for advanced D&D were still being written. I mean, the player's handbook had just come out, but the Dungeon Master's Guide, the book that tells you how to run the game, was still a year away. So the adventure itself had to teach DMs this whole new style of play. He was building the plane while he was flying it.
So here's the hook. After you've defeated the fire giants, you find out that the real masterminds behind the whole plot are this sinister race of dark elves called the Drow. And as they flee, you have to chase them down a hidden passage behind a literal river of lava deep into the earth. There's no king giving you a quest. There's no reward. There's just a trail leading into pure, absolute darkness.
And what was waiting for them in that darkness? Oh man, it was so much more than just another monster in a room. Gygax introduced entire subterranean civilizations, bad guys with culture, history, and their own terrifying logic.
First up, the Drow. They were described as an imperialistic, fascist, and matriarchal society, and they were a total revelation. With their jet-black skin and snow-white hair, their entire culture was this complex, poisonous web of sadistic cruelty and deadly political games. They weren't just evil for evil's sake, they were this sophisticated civilization, pulling ideas from authors like Michael Moorcock and Poul Anderson.
But the Drow weren't the only ones down there. Gygax also threw in the Kuo-Toa, which are basically his fantasy RPG version of H.P. Lovecraft's Deep Ones. And these guys were just creepy. Creepy fish-like humanoids that were totally alien. You couldn't read their expressions, you couldn't understand their motives. They brought this flavor of unknowable cosmic horror into the game.
This is the moment players realize this isn't a dungeon, it's a sovereign state. You are invading an empire. The Drow had legions of slaves like bugbears and troglodytes. They used undead ghouls as guards. They even had military checkpoints, not just to stop heroes like you, but to keep tabs on their own ambitious, backstabbing family members. The monsters were one thing, for sure, but the true genius of this module was in its mechanics. It took the simple act of traveling and turned it into this source of constant, grinding tension. And it all came down to a few brilliant innovations. Gygax came up with the subterranean hex-crawl. The map was broken up into these hexes, and each one was a full mile of travel. And your choices really mattered. Do you take the risk and use the primary tunnels, the big highways where you're almost guaranteed to run into heavily armed Drow patrols?
Or do you try to squeeze through the cramped tertiary passages, where you might avoid the army, but you're going to run into all sorts of other nasty things in the dark?
And right here, this is the brutal math that drove the entire experience. There was a 1 in 10 chance of a random encounter for every single mile you traveled. Now, for 1 mile, that's not so bad. But when your journey is hundreds of miles long, this simple mechanic turns into a brutal war of attrition. It's a constant, slow drain on your spells, your hit points, and your sanity.
Oh, this is one of my absolute favorite parts. It's so brilliant and so mean. Gygax actually included a map for the players to find, one they supposedly looted off a dead Drow scout. But here's the thing, the map was a lie. A malicious, intentional lie. It left out important tunnels, it got the distances wrong, it completely omitted entire areas. What this did was create real, actual paranoia at the gaming table, which perfectly mirrored the character's own terror and confusion. Just genius.
Ironically, the module's famous open-ended sandbox feel actually came from Gygax getting annoyed with his players. The story goes that during playtesting, his group started complaining that the endless dark tunnels were getting boring, so Gygax, in a moment of frustration, conveniently lost his detailed notes for the next part of the journey. This little accident forced him to rely on his random encounter tables, and in doing so, he accidentally created the legendary sandbox experience the adventure is now famous for.
You really can't overstate the impact of this adventure. It did so much more than just add a few new monsters to the game. It basically created an entire subgenre of fantasy that is still a huge part of the hobby today.
It's as simple as this. This adventure is where the Underdark was born. Now, they didn't call it that back then. You'll see names like Under Earth in the old texts, but the core idea of a massive continent-spanning world deep underground, full of glowing fungi and warring dark elf civilizations, it all started right here. And for all you collectors and enthusiasts out there, the physical module itself is a goldmine of weird little oddities. The copyright page actually has a typo in the title. An artist managed to sneak Captain America's shield and Iron Man's helmet into one of the illustrations. It's the first time we ever see the Germlane, who are basically just tiny, angry old men. And there's even a super rare 5th printing that was made with a cardboard top so it could hang on the pegs at Toys R Us.
And this brings us back to a really crucial question for today. The original module presented the Drow as this terrifying alien force. They were sadistic, unknowable fascists from a lightless nightmare world. But over the last few decades, thanks mostly to some very popular fantasy novels, they've become one of the most popular anti-hero choices for players. And that leaves us with something to think about. In making the Drow understandable, even heroic, have we maybe lost the one thing that made the Underdark so scary and compelling to begin with? It's pure, unknowable horror?